Hey everyone! In light of the global pandemic and in an effort to stay socially distant, sadly this year Mardi Gras parades have been canceled here in New Orleans. I was really looking forward to bringing Penny out to her first Mardi Gras parades. Last year we didn't get to do that. One, because she was like a fresh baby. I probably wouldn't have wanted to bring her out to the big crowds and stuff just yet. And also we ended up in the hospital with her for Mardi Gras, so that was super fun. So we didn't really have a choice in the matter. She's fine now, everything's great. Anyway, because parades aren't happening and because New Orleans is New Orleans, some people have taken it upon themselves to make their homes look like Mardi Gras floats. It's super fun and inspiring to see what people are doing, and it inspired me to attempt to decorate my own home. Not anything like super crazy extravagant like people have been doing so far. I was just planning on building a flower to put on my door, which you'll see how that goes in this video. But you should definitely check out the Krewe of houses or the hashtag Gras. People have been posting their decorated houses there. I'll leave a link to all of that kind of stuff down below. You should definitely go see what people are doing. If you want to decorate your house but you don't have the time or you don't want to make the like big decor pieces, you should definitely try to hire a Mardi Gras artist. Either hire them to decorate your house, or some people I've seen, they are making props and flowers and whatever and selling those as individual pieces that you can then buy and stick on your house. I'll leave a link to as many people as I can. Anyway, I'm just gonna try to make some float style flowers, so I wanted to walk you guys through my attempt at making those. So let's get started. I'm going to be making two different types of flowers. One that's built petal by petal, and then one that is just like one piece where all the petals are within one piece of poster board. Cutting each petal out on its own means that you can build a much bigger flower. With that, obviously, each poster board that's as big as each petal can be, so you can get pretty big with it. Obviously, you're limited to the size poster board that you have when you have to cut a whole flower from one piece. And for me, I got like half-size poster board, I think, so the single piece flower that I made is actually pretty small, for a float flower anyway. My inspiration flower for my big flower is the gladiolus, which is my birth month flower. It has 3 petals on the base and then 3 more layered on top. I sketched out the petals and the leaves onto my poster board, and then I cut the pieces out. For each petal and each leaf, you want 2 pieces of poster board because you're going to be gluing those 2 pieces around a wire. So for my flower, I did 3 large petals, and then I did 3, I wouldn't say small petals, but they were just a little bit smaller than the large petals. And then I did 3 leaves. Then I cut wire for each petal and leaf. I cut each piece so that it would be a little bit shorter than the tip of the petal or leaf, but then it would also stick out of the bottom a couple inches as well. I found that if the wire was too close to the tip of the petal or leaf, the poster board didn't stick very well. I had to go back and re-glue some of the petal tips of one of my smaller flowers because I put the wire too close to the tip. I would probably give it like 2 inches of space between the tip and the wire, maybe. That seemed to work pretty well. Once everything was ready to go, it was time for spray adhesive. I took a petal, opened it up so that the pieces mirrored each other. Some people at this point tape the wire down to keep it in place, but I just went straight for the spray adhesive. Also, some people spray paint the inside of the petals at this point to help give the poster board some strength, but I skipped that. So I sprayed the glue, and then when that was tacky, which takes about a minute with the glue I used, I laid wire in the middle and then stuck the poster board back together, lining it up as best as I could, and then I pressed them together really well. When all of the petals and leaves were glued together, I moved on to paint. I went with the standard Mardi Gras color scheme, purple, green, and gold, or yellow in this case. I lightly sprayed the middle with yellow. I didn't want a harsh line, I wanted the colors to blend, so I sprayed it at more of an angle and further away like so. For the purple, I sprayed around the edges. When this side was dry, I flipped them over and repeated the same paint job on the other side. And then, to let these dry completely, I made a hook out of the extra bit of wire sticking out at the bottom, and I hung them on one of our outdoor tables. I keep meaning to get rid of this table. It's old, rusty, and is falling apart, but we keep finding random uses for it, like hanging these spray-painted petals, so it has yet to be thrown away. So once those were dry, I took them inside and painted the detail on. For the leaves, I painted around the edges and up the middle to make the veins of the leaf. With this same color, I kind of pulled the paint in from the edges to the middle, like so. When that was dry, I went back with the darker green and outlined the edges and the veins again. For the petals, I did some strokes of white, going from the middle and coming out. And then I outlined it in purple, adding a couple more lines around the edges to give it some more dimension. My inspiration flowers have a bit of frilliness in the edges of their petals, so this was me trying to mimic that look. Finally, I lined the edges again with a darker purple. When these were dry, I shaped the petals and the leaves. I held the wire at the base down with my hand and gently bent the petal up, and then I flipped the petal and bent the wire so that the tip of the petal would be bending back down. So when you look at the petal from the side, it's sort of an S shape. I basically shaped all of the petals and the leaves like this. It was just a different amount of bending, I guess. The leaves got bent the least, so they were the most flat. Then the base petals I bent a little bit more, and then the top layer of petals I bent the most. The next day I took these out again, and then I sprayed them front and back with clear acrylic sealer. Since these are going to be out on the house, exposed to weather, I wanted them to be rainproof, so I used a lot of sealer. This stuff goes quick, so get a lot of it if you are making your own decor. And now for assembly. I used plywood to mount the leaves and the petals. It's just a piece of scrap, but I believe that it's about 1/2 inch thick, and it was big enough to hold all the pieces, but then small enough to be hidden by the flower pieces in the end. I laid out the leaves and the petals how I wanted the flower to be, and then I tried my best to transfer the leaves onto the wood in the same positioning as it was on the ground. In hindsight, it probably would have been easier to just lay the flower out on the piece of wood already, but anyway, I stapled the leaves down, doing 2 staples per leaf, both along the wire to tack that down. You want to make sure that you're stapling the wire, because that is what's going to really hold it in place. If I made another big flower again, I would probably trim the wire bits that extend out of the base of the leaves and the petals. It's not too bad here, but after putting all of the petals on, it was kind of a jumbled mess in the middle. I mean, it gets covered, so that's not really the issue, but I did have to staple into the center, and so I was kind of trying to navigate my way around all of those wires. So yeah, if I was going to do it again, I would just cut those. They're basically there so that you can make them into hooks and hang them when they're drying. Anyway, I placed the next petals and stapled them down the same way that I did the leaves. And then the final petals. With these, I took care not to staple too far out. I wanted to keep it more centralized because that would get covered by the eventual center of the flower that I'm going to make. I guess it's not the end of the world if I accidentally stapled too far out. You could just paint over it, but I wanted to avoid that. Anyway, to cover the middle, for now, I just cut out a circle of poster board and stapled it down just to make sure that there was no bare board or wires or anything showing. I went back and forth on how I wanted to do the center of the flower, but eventually I settled on doing a crumpled piece of poster board surrounded by loops of poster board. So I cut a bunch of strips of poster board and painted them yellow, focusing more on the middle. I also crumpled up a piece of poster board, sprayed that yellow, and sprinkled some gold glitter on while the paint was still wet so that it would stick. When the strips were dry, I painted some white lines in the middle to give them a bit more dimension. I glued the strips together at the ends to make a sort of loop, like this. Again, another project where I got to use glue dots. I went from never using these things to using them in multiple projects in a row. I don't think I mentioned it in my last video with Penny's birthday stuff, but I used a couple glue dots to stick some of the balloons from Penny's balloon garland together. So that's like 3 videos in a row. Anyway, I used the piece of poster board that I cut the middle circle out of to help lay out the loops to make sure that they would be big enough. I laid out the loops in a circle, using more glue dots to hold everything together. I'm using just enough to hold the pieces together until I can get these out to staple them. I trimmed up some of the ends of these loops so that they wouldn't stick out once I placed the crumpled paper. Then I took these bits out to the flower and stapled them in place. I sprayed the middle with clear sealer and then went back over the whole thing with like 2 more coats for good measure. And here it is, all done. Looking back at it now, I feel like the middle looks a bit rushed. I may go back and paint some darker yellow around the edges of the loopies to make them stand out a bit more, because I feel like it just looks a little flat. I don't know, what do you guys think? Anyway, that's the big flower. Time to rewind and show you guys how I did the small flower. Like before, I drew the shape that I wanted on poster board. With this, I did a 5-petaled flower. 2 layers, one as big as I could go with the poster board, and the other one a little bit smaller, maybe like an inch smaller. I cut these pieces out, making sure to have 2 of each layer because of the whole sandwiching the wires thing, and then I cut wire for each petal. I cut the wire so that it would be about 3/4 of the length of each petal. I sprayed the adhesive, let it get tacky, laid the wires down, and then I stuck the pieces back together. I also made some smaller leaves for this flower as well. I painted these with the same paint job as the big flower, but also when I was doing the detailing layer, I added a couple yellow spots in the middle of the small flower. Then I bent the wires like so, doing the kind of S shape. I sprayed them with clear sealer. And finally, I stapled these onto a piece of scrap wood. This time, it's a little bit of old cedar fence board. For the middle of this one, I cut a small styrofoam ball in half, painted it yellow, and covered it with gold glitter. And then to finish the flower off, I hot glued it in place, covering the staple. And there we go. I also did one more flower, as you can see here. There are a couple ways that you can mount these to your wall or fence or whatever you feel like mounting it to. If you're going into wood, you could just drill them in through the wood base into the wood. My original plan was to hang it from a wreath hanger on my door. I ended up having to change that because I wanted the big flower to be up there and I made it way too big for the door. So plan B was mounting it to the brick of my house. So thankfully in this spot where I wanted to hang it, there is actually some old like anchors that the previous owner had used to mount some like shutters for our window. So I just screwed in another screw right there so that I could hang my flower, pretty much like hanging a picture. So for that, on the back of my wooden bases, I had to install a picture hanging wire, basically. So the way that I did it was I just stapled the wire onto the back of the wooden bases of the flowers. Really, I should have done this before I stapled the flowers onto the wood. It would have been way easier, but I just like to make these projects harder for myself, I guess. So then I hung the big flower on the shutter screw anchor. I hung the medium-sized flower on a different shutter screw anchor, and then I finished it by hanging the small flower onto our door with the wreath hanger. And there we go. Definitely not as extravagant as some of the other house floats that I've seen. I mean, I wouldn't even really call mine a house float, but I'm happy that I was able to do a little bit of something for Mardi Gras this year. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you later. Bye!